The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.
Hello.
Hey, Lee.
How are you? Oh,
Good.
there we
It's
are.
great to meet you.
Great to meet you. And I wanted to show you my last name to make sure you get it right is, can you see it?
Uh-huh.
MCCTEY. There's no W.
Ah,
So,
okay.
so yeah, so I just wanted to, what's in a name? Well, it's the family name. So, so how you doing? I'm delighted you reached out and said hello. And I'm also delighted I was able to look at your work as an artist. I thought, oh gosh, we've got a lot to talk about, even
Yeah.
the approach, which I was, of course, one, if you say one mind with many voices,
Mm.
I really do. I feel that so strongly now, particularly. So, you know,
Sure. Yeah, I think that there is a kind of collective movement of artists that are all exploring the nature of consciousness and trying to evolve the consciousness of the planet in some way. And we're all sort of working together as a community to make that happen.
well, part of why I wanted to make sure, because I realized you're in Bali, but to make sure you had the text
Hmm.
of Tarot Revision, because part of, as you know, the frustration is how do we uh, in a way engage these energies and create space for them. So it's not that everyone's interested, but really, like cultivators, we organize or we give them voice. And the tarot that I sent, and I really think it's the way I even wrote it was to look at the drawing, then to look at the quote, to really ruminate, and then in the beginning to look at the archetype, and then to look at the symbolism of the drawing. And I just felt, as an artist, because as you know, one of our questions is, what are the fundamental structures underneath these energetic patterns? And that was what a lot of this, I really just feel, in terms of our shared interest, we each bring books to the library, and in a sense we bring parts of a treasure map. And that's part of why the 17 years I spent on it, realizing this is not going to be for everyone, but for those of us that do think in the deeply symbolical, but also in the living process of the symbolical, begin to say, are there markers, are there ways I can navigate the many, the characters and characteristics of these energies? And that's why, so when we talk, I think there's a lot to really bring into focus, that, we are sharing what I really feel is the seeds of Renaissance. It's not one of us, it's a shared willingness. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, your tarot project was what drew me towards you. I was first introduced to it through a friend, Emma Watkinson, who is a fellow visionary artist, who told me about it. And then I had the chance to experience the book in physical form at the Theosophical Library in Ojai and some other places, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. I think it's one of the most beautiful depictions of the tarot ever made. And I'm a big fan of the tarot myself. Primarily, I love the Thoth deck. I think it's an incredible work,
yeah.
and Lady Frida Harris's artwork is just stunning with it. But your depiction is even more in depth. I think it's updated. It's really
Well,
remarkable.
I really feel like an archaeologist. And a matter of fact, I feel like with your generation, because like with Flying Lotus, with Dave Wexler, or Strange Loop, Brain Feeder, there's like your generation, in a way, I feel I'm the last of a generation that had to distill, almost like the Piscean bridge to the Aquarian. And you are the Aquarian. You don't need to be
Mm,
taught. You really need to trust your triggers. And
mm,
that's where I feel that we start to see we are in a deeper pattern. And the archetypes, this work of love, was a type of archaeological dig that said, essentially, because usually, like with, say, Frida Harris and with Crowley, you had the metaphysician and the artist separate, which is an
hmm.
interesting conversation. But when it becomes amalgamated in the embodied individual, when we midwife it quite literally, embody it, I really believe there's a deeper type of insistence on authenticity, almost like a love affair. Do you know what I mean? That you can't
Yeah.
fill in what you don't know by pretending. And I feel like that's why the due diligence in the work isn't me making up anything. It's really just pointing out, no, this was not done as an illustration of anything, but a process of emergence.
Mm. Yeah, that's how I've interpreted Lady Frida Harris's process with it. I think that Crowley would deliver her these large texts that she would kind of read, but then she would go into her own process with it, and something that would come through would be really different than what he initially said that he wanted, and that it would be perfect. That's at least my interpretation based on the communications I've seen between them, because she seemed really artist brain and he was very rational. So they had that kind of like marriage that worked together.
Well, and I think that's why it's so powerful. There is a synergy. And there's also humility in the Book of Thoth. He says, I am attributing, I do not know necessarily. So, and I feel that way, artists, when they're honest, saying, listen, I'm not trying to be messianic here. I'm trying to honor a tradition that is asking me to live up to the questions, not to bring them into what I already know. And that was the great challenge with the tarot. And that's why we do build upon, and I feel that it's the jazz side of things. Like, I don't want to change your instrument. I can see yours is different than mine, but it's exploring the depth of these questions. And that's what I feel is because the contribution I needed to make, because when I was, it really got me out here because my life was as an actor, right? It was, I was doing, when I was doing a very popular show in the early 80s called Dallas, it allowed me to buy a house, or at least start paying for a house in Malibu, which is where I'd grown up. And I realized that because my dad was one of the founders of the Malibu Art Association, and when I grew up in Malibu, it was very rural. It wasn't sort of shishi. That came later. It was much more artist. It was a community of horse people, coming out to try and be individuals. That's why it's still a pact with everyone's deeply individualistic. You can't find a type of philosophical or political norm. It's everyone is sort of like, well, I'll tell you what I think. And that's what I've kind of grew up with, that sense of, you don't tell your neighbor what to think or how to be or what's wrong with them unless you want to have a fight. and you create a space where, if you're interested in this and I'm interested, let's get together. Let's talk about this. So I started discussion groups in my home 39 years ago. And I have had them every Tuesday night. And then Thursday night at a Theosophy discussion group. We even read Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine over 9 years.
Wow.
So it was this,
cool.
And I really feel like that's why even the work here, this hieroglyph of the human soul that began on 9/11, is the library. And it's this place where the creative have gathered. And I started to realize, like the tarot, the round table, right? That we start to say, well, what's the question you ask as an artist, as a creative being? What do I do with the anguish? How do I not tell a story that blames you? But brings you into a sense of deeper synergy. It's almost like Frida Harris and Crowley, the thing where together we're more interesting than alone. And something in this, and why I feel like yours is the quarantine. What do you call your blog now? It's the quarantine sessions, just because of the timing. Yeah.
Because here we are, like, able to have this conversation primarily because of this circumstance.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that, if you think of something that slows you down, and there's nowhere to go, that one is truly asked, well, what do you do now? And part of my question, and this was the big question, and why a lot of what we go and talk about, is that 2 years ago, actually on 2 years to the day of the election, the Malibu Park Woolsey fire hit us, and we're in the Malibu Park area. As I said, I grew up out here, and I'd experienced fire, so I had no intention of leaving. And when we were hit really by a fire tornado, this whole journey of having to work with nature, having to trust the environment because the neighbors were gone, everything was gone, and it was being thrust into a type of critical mass. And I started to realize symbolically that we've reached the end of the journey. In a sense, the fire, the rage, the taking, the wanting more has gone as far as it can go. And that's when it's that sense of, like a tree, needing to stand one's ground, to trust our roots. And that's why our conversation, not to go on and on, but our conversation, I think, is important, because I believe this is how we create permission for a type of neurological wiring in the DNA. We're a much more highly volatile creative entity than we think we are. We're the ones that have to create the permission for it, almost like theater, right? We have to say, I'll suspend my disbelief and explore what I find most fascinating.
Absolutely. And I think that these types of group discussions are very important. And even with the Theosophical Society, it was a group of individuals that were coming together to explore ideas, not so much to say this is how things are, but let's look at things and explore and discover and contribute to the conversation. And I think in the tradition of tarot, it's similar, even with people who have interpreted the tarot as being, a condensation of a mapping of the Kabbalistic tree of life, and it has parallels to the Hebrew alphabet and things like that. It's that's just an interpretation, and it's an ongoing excavation into it, because the roots of the tarot are still mysterious, and it's alive in the sense that it's being created anew by artists like yourself and by many others in the past who have interpreted it through various symbol systems. And I'm curious though, in regards to your own work with the tarot, how much of it was influenced by the sort of Order of the Golden Dawn style approach to it, and looking at it as being a kind of codex for the Kabbalistic tree of life and things like that? Is that very foundational for your work?
I'd almost say that my work was a type of resolution of and I actually had an inner conversation, and I think a lot of us do, with what I call the Blakean spirit, Blake and Blavatsky, the same thing. And the feeling was that Blake's mythic universe, his archetypal stories, that he ended up feeling that they were almost too opaque, that he wanted to have more of a deeper esoteric philosophical backbone. And there's this relationship, like an idea, right, that says, I need to have a trajectory through these individuals, because it's not one, it's in a way, one will complete a particular stage. Like Blake, really the relationship to the poetic imagination that he creates for all of us, really almost like Goethe, a type of seed moment, like we really can say, oh, I see how this moment evokes the next question. It's not a stylistic question. It's, all right, well, if this mythic center bursts out of me and I end up feeling that I need to have more, again, of an analogy and correspondence, like all esoteric and really religious and traditions, as we know, do. And I feel Blavatsky came along, and she creates, especially in the the 19th century, in the age of scientism and materialism, she's really the first to bring into what Einstein realizes is the basis of a lot of his work, because she's not looking at the atom as something fixed, but really, as we see now, much more a quantum state, a type of living sentience. But she's saying, well, wait a minute, though, this is not made up. There is this other tradition, which is the secret doctrine, meaning that which is not given, because if it's given and unwanted, it is only confusing. And I think that that's why these books aren't, oh, let's just knock them out. They don't make any sense. Think about your questions as an artist, right? You might ask things or probe things because they're working through your inner life. In a sense, they're seeking to find voice, where in others, it's not so much. And that's why I really think that when these things are active, and I really feel that the tarot revision then, because of my work with Theosophy and having the discussion group and really honoring the fact that the truth was that like dance, like a great performance, it's hard work. It's not you just rush into creating a Chippendale, chair. You must take time. You must be a gardener. And I feel like that's why when we look at Crowley, we look at Blavatsky, we look at Gurdjieff, we look at all of these different influences, go back to Blake and Goethe, we start to see how there's a lineage, that is trying to say, this is the lineage that exists as a type of counter current. And that's why my tarot, I really feel, in fact, I know it is that I did not intentionally mean to do this. And I think you know that those are the best revelations. But my house being a place of what's the question we cannot answer for others or outside of where we live. And it came down to actually a theosophical discussion where this elderly man said, a beautiful man, but he said, yes, this is good and all of that, but what do you do with the despair? And it really struck me. I said, yeah, that's the question. That's all fine and dandy, but what do you do with the despair? I got to live with me 24 hours a day. And I don't know about you, but I was not inwardly in a state of peace and calm. I mean, I really, my art is the outcome of having to find languages. Almost you could say the conversation that begins with, I knew I wasn't crazy, but you start talking, people think, Leigh, I think this is, and that's why, but I feel like that's also why part of my work on the tarot and part of the reason why it's in my home is that my home ended up being a great metaphor. And even my art on the floor became a great metaphor, the Hieroglyph, the human soul, which actually the acronym, unbeknownst to me, is THOTHS. So it becomes Thoth's library. And I have a studio here above with the library where we meet and have all the conversations. And then a studio below, which is a room I designed for my father. You've got to love the mythic adventure here. The son designs for the father the room wherein the 22 archetypes line the walls. So the below has the archetypes below, the 22 keys like the piano. And the father downstairs, if we think about it, says, listen, kid, you're not leaving home until you realize the Empress is not the devil. I want to teach you the black and white of things, Dorothy. And so we end up, and it's interesting, my tarot took me 17 years. And of course, as you know, if you live in the symbolical field, everything becomes deeply symbolical and relevant because it's saying, note, when do you leave home? When you're around 17. And basically your dad, your mom says, you know what, you got to go figure this out. You got to put you together. You've got the instrument, but you got to learn how to play it. And it's going to be different than it is for your sister or brother, And so the symbology here, because we begin back in 1981, and all of the people, the Theosophists show up, but then because that's Eastern looking, I then create a Thursday night look at alchemy, inner tradition, Jung, and all of because I really want to have, again, this balance of not one symbolical system, but draw from all of them, because this is what I feel artists need to do, is be like actors, like musicians, be energized by ideas, not figure out which one to believe. Who has time to do that? It's like, no, this is actually feeding something that's saying my trust is like training in water. It's teaching me how to swim, not to delegate and isolate. So essentially, to make a long story short, we come upstairs, we have above and below, and we think of Hermes and the tarot, the black and white. Below saying, as above, so below, as within, so without. What is the last question? It is intimacy. How do we make sense of where we live? How can we incorporate the above and the below? And interestingly, in my house, there is an in-between, meaning that there are 3 levels. When you come up from the downstairs, you enter the domestic plane, Yes, back. You're in Bali, right?
I'm in Bali, and this is just one of the aspects that comes with living here. As magical as it is, I don't quite know the name of the Wi-Fi deity yet to be able to, do the proper offerings to get that situated all the time. So this happens occasionally, but I have like 3 different Wi-Fi systems that I can use as backups, because this is a relatively common problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So how long have you been there? Have you been?
I've been
Long?
here for 2.5 years now. I actually came here the first
Wow.
time 4 years ago and was only going to stay here for maybe 6 weeks, and I just fell in love with it, and I decided to
Oh,
not
yeah.
go back.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
a
Oh, I actually was a Balinese artist. I remember years ago watching, saying everything in Bali is art. He said, our children, the rice. And I thought, and he said, the line that got me, he said, without art, one goes mad. And I thought,
Mhm.
oh yeah, that's my kind of place. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Also,
Yeah, art is so central to their culture. They're all artists here, and they're some of the best artists in the world, and yet so humble
they
about
are.
it too. They don't see it as any kind of ego thing. It's just what they do.
Well, it's interesting for me because part of what, talking about is remember the symbology of the house and whatnot. It's also on Shumash land. It's sacred land. And
Mhm.
there's a sense of the custodial nature of the creative spirit where, that, and I realized part of my work, because it wasn't intentional, but it was about finally coming home, meaning let me honor the land, let me honor the ancestors, let me honor my family, let me honor those who show up and, like myself, say, I want to honor what I'm interested in. I want it to be a love affair, not a critique. That doesn't do me. I do the critique for myself. That's why I say with artists, we don't need help with a critique. We really need that sense of what you'd say, almost riffing, a greater synergy that breaks
Mhm.
through because we just expand beyond, as you know, when you're stuck in a painting. Oftentimes it's not what you're looking at all. It's an energetic quality that begins to almost like you'd say a different musicality that uses it like a skin. And all of my paintings are layer over layer because I'm not working from a sketch or a preliminary drawing. Everything is the act of discovery. And so my universe of organism paintings are my Phoenix Arise, which creates the holographic DNA and the mandalas as a fractal, which is fascinating from a card form, which was not expected. I even did a TEDx talk on it, which is interesting. It's only about 10 minutes long on the blossoming of creation, because this started to inform me that we, because of the way we're trained, like we think sacred geometry, geometry is the key. But essentially, sacred geometry has to do with the deeper harmonics that are the qualities of beauty. You'd say like the blossoming, the greater beauty that is not in the math of it, so to speak, but in the greater revealing of life. And that's why it moves us energetically. And I feel like that's a lot of why, I'm sure Bali is the way, in many ways, a type of sanctuary. And this is what my home has been for so many, because, I really do. And I
Mhm.
think it was my acting career professionally, which allowed me to be, in a way, a pure artist, because I never had to sell. I never had to convince
Right.
somebody they should be interested. And I realized with
Mhm.
Theosophy, a lot of New Age people want, in a way, just different drapery for old ideas that they don't, they're comfortable with. But then
Mhm.
there's those of us that say, listen, I want to know the foundations. I want to know that why, if somebody says be yourself, I think, well, which one? Do you know why, if I play a murderer as an actor, can I, you'll be convinced I'm going to murder you, but it'd be the farthest, in other words, what is it that allows us, like mask wearing,
Mhm.
to give ourselves to the experience without being afraid that we will be undone by the experience. And this is one of the things, because I know your work in psychedelics and in that relationship, there's a lot of remarkable work going on. And part of my work, I realized, was to create a type of stable context, almost like an environment. That's what the library became, which was that when the knights, when, in a sense, when the warriors go out, it's a different dragon and there's different stories, but there has to be a centralizing hub. This is what the archetypes were for me. This is why I think that for me, unintentionally, but when I began on 9/11, 2001, on my knees with the emergence of what's called the Watcher language, which is a repeating form of entity that has woven into an entire system that starts to reveal to me that we're so used to thinking that it is about being somewhere else, or we're not that, or we have to get, and like the fire burning to the coast, the question is, well, what if there's no further to go? What if you're not getting somewhere, but you're trying to turn around and make sense of, well, why am I here? Why has the human condition been so cruel? Why is it so cruel? But also, why in that alchemy of darkness have those been, those like ourselves that say, I can't change that. But if I can transmute what makes me angry into something that becomes a song, that we can sing to, in a sense lightens. Even my work called Mothership, she says it's revelations in pink. It's not enlightenment, it's enlighten up. And I like that, And,
Yeah.
you know.
You were talking before about a sense of tradition. The way I see it, it's like there are living symbols that seek expression through different people as a continuum, and I think that separates tradition, because tradition asserts that there's a particular way that things need to be in order to be correct. But with the tarot, for example, the tarot as a system is alive, and it finds expression through many different people that have a personal relationship to it and different interpretations of it. And that's what makes these systems remarkable, is that they're alive.
Well, I started to realize as an actor, you don't say, oh, that's the Hamlet performance. You learn from whether it's Olivier or Mel Gibson, or whether, it's local theater or one's own performance. You learn about Hamlet by embodying it. And if one is honest, Hamlet is the archetype that transcends any one of the performances, as if to say that the symbolical can be interpreted and should be whole and holy, so that your reading, let's say, of a poem is not the one, in a sense, the reading. It is a relationship with the creative spirit that says, through you, my voice is different. So trust our relationship, not what you're proving to another. And that's what I feel is in a way the world that to a great degree is so disappointing, the quarantine which is drawing back. I rather feel that if we think about, in the archetypal sense, the feminine and masculine aspects of consciousness, that our masculine mind, to get here, our ego has pushed so hard. And I feel like that's what the tarot showed me, because each of the archetypes, as you know, is a unique quality. It's and that working in the way I did, it was like taking a lens and looking very, very deep into a type of rooted connectedness that wasn't based on other work. It wasn't based on anyone else's drawings. It was quite literally like an actor taking on the role, saying, I don't want to interpret this according to so-and-so's role. Like, I read everything I could on the tarot. I read so much that it freed me, because in a way, if you only read a little, you start to realize, oh, it's this or it's that. But what we're looking for, and I feel this is the creative agent here, is to finally be freed, almost like the actor's many masks, to not over rely on one interpretation. Like you said with the tarot, if we think, no, it's about how do these ideas bounce off of each other. It's not to create something static. The whole point of a fixed image, I realize, is that it allows us then to engage it, to have rapport. And much of why I feel that we have forgotten we are the technology. In a sense, the genius of what we are is that we do not allow ourselves to go beyond the qualities of a type of natural evolutionary growth, meaning that everything must support the growth from which the new quality, like a tree, will hold its greater revelation. My insight now is, because of the discussions, because of the incompleteness of the Western psyche, the sense of the hollowness at the heart of things, I started to realize, well, wait a minute, maybe that's the spur, how filling in the anguish with something that isn't about the anguish. And that then does become the doorway to the storytellers and the ancestors to say, yeah, we've been trying to tell our children as well, why in a world that seems hopeless, that your relationship with the creative spirit, not because, again, you're selling something, but because you're willing to love something. And I think that's we're so used to the hard sell magic of a type of on-off switch, as opposed to this other sense of the cultivation. And the old alchemists called themselves celestial gardeners. And I thought, if we could look at ourselves as that now, that our conversation now isn't just this conversation. It's also on a quantum level, a type of invitation to let these things at least within this intimate space, be of relevance. And to me, that's when the beloved shows up. You know, not to prove something, but to say you're finally in a place where you and I can be, and you're not looking towards something, thinking that this is not it. It is that sense of be here now. And I think the creative is what allows us to finally be there honestly. Do you know, it's not that the anguish is done away with and one is in happy land. It's that you finally realize, like storms within the system, I can navigate this now. And that's what the archetypes, going back to the tarot, really give, and why I feel the book and the text is of such essential importance for us, because it is hermetic, it is alchemical, it gets at the mystery teachings, because a lot of my work with Kabbalah, with these different systems, made me aware that when I wrote the book, that I didn't want to overemphasize. I didn't footnote everything. It could have been a very academic work or this and this, but I wanted it to be an invitation, and I didn't want to overwhelm with Kabbalistic words when I felt that just the idea expansion inherent in moving from, in a sense, a materialistic view of reality to an energetic archetypal lens of how thought is thing, and what we pay attention to pays attention to us, which is why even in my tarot, it's very interesting. I could never create a magician. It was the magus, and you'll see the image. It's a seed. It's the magus, as that you must plant seeds, questions of life. Only life enters the arcana. If you plant seeds of death or questions of fear, you are not welcome. You are bringing a type of unresolved smallness that you must leave at the door. And I really feel like that's the pandemic. Everyone is naked. You know, there's nowhere to go. Everyone is feeling, God, what do I do? And I almost feel like that's the pain of recognizing that you can't run from this because you're woven of it. And that it's finding a sense, well, then what and how, if I can't change the world. And I feel every poet knows this, because my joke is, you know, even a successful poet is still broke. You know, it's not a widely popular thing, you know, but you start to realize that, to me, that's the part of our soul that says, and I think the poetic says, going back to Blake and all of this, if you have that primary relationship, allow these qualities, they will follow a season. You know, they won't be that it's always empty. It's like you'll realize, no, I've had to make sense of this for myself. And I think that's the power of my artwork, like my Codex Tor books, my Illuminate books. Everything was really inspired by my dad, who was a painter. And he said, when you can't talk about something, paint it. And as you know, philosophically, you reach a point, or theosophically, when you're studying, or alchemically, where you say, if I can't, and I think this was going back to Frida Harris, part of the revelation of visual thinkers, that if I say certain things to you as a visual thinker, it will open up a symphonic response, not a linear response. And as you then translate it through your midwifing of it, it becomes something uniquely in rapport with you. Do you know, in a sense, it becomes the mentor that you are quite literally birthing. Mm-hmm. And we are that technology. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must be. I think that the role of the actor actually is quite, it's an interesting exploration of consciousness, because it allows you to liberate yourself from one particular identity. And so that you can see that what is underneath the identity is more real. Like you said, you can be a murderer or you can be a saint as an actor and fully embody that. But yet the consciousness that exists beneath that is unchanging. And I think in the same way, the archetypes from the tarot, they represent the many different facets of life and of ourselves, where we are the devil, you know, and we are the priestess, and we're all of the things. And yeah, for me, when I create art, it's more of a listening type experience. And I'm sure you can relate to this as well, where if I attempt to impose logically my ideas onto something, things don't go very well. But if I get to a place of surrender where I can be open and listen to what wants to present itself through me as a midwife, like you suggested, that's where the gold seems to be. And then I am taught, as you suggested as well, by the artwork that I create, rather than me trying to impose my will and control onto the medium.
See, that is because part of the wedding for me as an actor, the question, and why I think also the tarot is so powerful with tarot revision, because the questions of embodiment, one of the experiments I have people when they're working with the cards, I say, first, I want you to stand and put them in a circle, stand in the center, and I want you to turn around and realize when you say, I am this, that you're turning in a circle, not just in the direction you're looking. And if you start to realize that if you think of a gyroscope, that this wheel is actually spinning, it's creating a type of force that allows you to finally not over-identify with a particular archetype or character, and therefore fall overboard. But this really gyroscopic force, this brings us back. Meaning, you'd say, well, why, if I read something passionate, can I give myself completely and not be undone by it? Why don't I disappear into the novel? You know what? And it's saying because there is this spin, and especially the greater the balance of these things, the more one is able to not blame. And if you think of the metaphor of the library, you'd say, yeah, there's sections of the library. I don't like those people. I don't like those authors. But the librarian says, yes, but they're part of the human story. And you'd say the same thing with the archetypes. I don't like the devil. Yes, but it's part of the human story, meaning it's a key on the piano. This is why they're called keys. But if we think of it, it is an instrument. And one of the thought experiments that's very helpful, and what I would say like a creative improvisation, is to take each of the 22 major arcana and to, let's say, stand with the magus, but in a circle. So you're looking as the magus into the circle. You're seeing the surround of these other characters, like an actor in a play. You realize they're all part of this larger body. And when you're in the center, but you realize, of course, this is your body, but it's on the vertical. Do you see this eye? This vertical eye that does not see, but when we think about it, the crown chakra is, it holds a type of greater wonder. It's almost that quality that, like a toroid, allows the wonder to come back into the realm of the black and white, or the quality you say when the black and white keys are played and the music is allowed to flow. And that's why I feel with this relationship again to embodiment, that if we stand as the magus, okay, tell the truth of reality as the magus. Now stand as the high priestess. Tell me the reality, and really allow yourself to embody it. You know, see, like the artist's eye, right? Does your lens go deep violet? Does it go into a different, you know, like trust that intuitive, that which is interesting with the tarot, because especially the early cards have to do with the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sense of breath, the sense of hearing. And this is very important because it brings us into the sensual intelligence, you know, the qualities of the hands that have nothing to do with the reasoning mind, but oftentimes resolve the problem. Almost like, you know, when I'm working with somebody with painting and they say, I'm having a problem, I say, close your eyes, paint. Don't look at it. And when you think it's a mistake, it's not a mistake. What it's done, it's moved you past the memory of the objection, and you will be forced not to reclaim what you thought you were trying to hold on to. You'll be forced to really reinvigorate it. And that's why I do. I started to understand that because we're not in a philosophical culture, or even one that cares about these things, I realized that the creative thinker really, this is why my work became visual philosophy. I didn't call it that. It called itself that, because it said, now you understand the nature of alchemical imagery, the nature of the Kabbalistic symbolism, of all of these continuums that are a living symbolical system trying, as you said as well, to reinvigorate itself through each of us uniquely, but through the artist lens, meaning the approach, the not knowing, rather than the religious or the engineering lens, which is, no, this is the fundamental structure you need to believe. In a way, the greater the symbolical system and the more deeply it's understood, like the piano, it's simply a structure. And in a way, we fight over the keys. That's what's going on in the world, in a sense. I hate that. And it's sort of, well, turn it into music. At least where you live, try and put it together. And that's what the library, in a way, its metaphor is always saying. When you realize that these problems are going on in all worlds, all times, but what are the examples that pull you back to your senses? And this is what archetype is very instructive for. It says, when you think, okay, well, I'm dealing with anguish. Well, guess what? You were in the cave as well. That's what's interesting for me. My work brought me back. I became a cave painter. 9/11, I began painting my floor. And what's even odder is that with 3D glasses, again, unexpected, it becomes multidimensional. So you're within a multidimensional environment, within domestic public space of gathering, where there's the library. You see, there's the archetypes below. In between is domestic responsibility, meaning, and this is what the fire was, when you cannot run, when you're a tree, you must stand your ground, but not against something. Rather, and even the trees told me, they said, we are not fuel, we're guardians. And the garden, because everything, when it was burning like Dante's Inferno around us, it was the garden said that everything in the garden is alive. Everything living wants to live. You're the part of the garden that's in motion. We have your back. I started to think of this because it helps us with the archetypes as well. When you see a wheel, not a line, it's that usually we're looking like through these two eyes. We're looking in the I and thou, this binary relationship. And a lot of our deeper look now, and that's why I feel like, because I've always been informed by Renaissance, and we talked just in the beginning, but I really feel that Renaissance was an idea that was allowed to inspire enough individuals to say, like gardeners, let us care about these things. And if people roll their eyes and don't care, bless them. They're not going to be in the gardening club, but let you and I. Because this is, again, where the beloved says, yeah, I'm not going to show up because you battle your way. You've battled your way here. And that was what I even got after the tarot. I thought, well, what, and I was met by a naked woman in my meditation where after I was done, and I was very happy with the tarot. And it was like really, I almost would say like a beautiful suit of armor. And she said, that this opened the door, but now the door you're walking through, you won't need this. And in fact, you'd drown with it. Where you're going, you need to learn to swim nakedly again. And that's what's interesting about the waters of the hieroglyph of the human soul. It became about the multidimensional waters saying that the last question, I mean, it's on linoleum, so it's ordinary. The last question is, what do we do with the ordinary? What do we do with where I live? What do I do with a world that never cares about these things when I care about them so much? And I think the deeper love is saying, then let's find each other. And if it's interesting, like good music, it'll find its own, and it does, and it does. It's just, I'm very encouraged that what changes the human condition is never a war, the repetition of bad ideas, but from that deeper, darker difficulty, we finally strip away from, I thought I could change my neighbor, but he doesn't care. But I'm starting to tell a story about what I hate rather than what I love. And that was the warning this fire said, is said that the human condition has forgotten what it loves and knows what it hates. And this is creating a drought, a dryness, a brittleness. And the fire said, I will find this and destroy it. Because it was very apocalyptic. Actually, with my book, read Death, Temperance, the Tower, and Judgment. Sitting down, but it is about these enormous forces that have been let loose that aren't interested in how we're feeling. It's a type of cumulative, which is an intriguing sense of coming full circle and having to no further to go, but finally having to stand up. And that's the solstice of the Mayan calendar, when the sun stops moving forward in time and stands erect. I'm also born on the summer solstice, so I've had an affinity with this sense of, well, what does that mean? And I love that it occurred in my home within a groups, different groups over the years. A river runs through it, right? But people like yourself that have come through a world going, you know what? You're really interested in this, Leigh, right? It's like, yeah. Oh, wow. You know, because it's like, you know, there's a pretty much we have to find each other, you know. And but I really feel like as the garden grows and as the conversation and questions change, nothing's been lost, because many of the things, one of the great gifts I feel is I've been able to ask questions and develop very intimately without having to worry about you know, whether it's known or not known. And like you reaching out, I said, that's great. This is what's important. It's not, you know, as an actor, you experience from the top down, you know, in a sense, you're trying to reach the many. Uh, and so it's a different martial art in all of this,
Hmm.
you know?
I think it's very wise what you were saying about focusing on what it is that we love and wish to cultivate rather than on what it is that we're fed up with. And instead of trying to overthrow an old system, to instead kind of conjure a new dispensation through what it is that inspires us, and to focus on cultivating that and growing that and tending that garden, as you said, and that through that a new revolution could blossom, a new
Yes.
renaissance could blossom. And yeah, that's a really inspiring idea, and certainly to also find the others. And you're doing that by creating a space, a sanctuary, which people can come to who are interested in these
Mhm.
ideas and explore them freely, and to learn more about it and to discover more about themselves in the process. And I think that that's very important.
Yeah, it's the saying, let us, because if we think of the sacred, it's creating space where we honor. You know, it's not for something. It is really a place that says, here we will allow these things to be of importance. And that's why the 25 years of Theosophy, it wasn't as if the world was ever interested in those things, or people didn't have time, or they had a snap opinion of Blavatsky, oh, she's crazy, like Blake. You know, it's like, which doesn't help the creative mind. We, you know, it's almost like you have to get past that, like a duck thinking that's just water off my back. Because this is too important to me. And I also say to people now, I say, listen, you know, this doesn't have to be important to you. It's important to me, and that's enough. So when people come to our home, I really feel, because home has a different level of intimacy and invitation. It says, I'm not afraid of you. You know, I don't know who you are. We've had people from all over the world, I mean, really come make a pilgrimage here, know about it for some reason in India. You know, it's like, because you think no one knows anything, or, you know, it's like it's just a handful of people. But what's interesting is that I realized that it was if the hieroglyph of the human soul, which is what it told me it was, woven of the Watcher language. Now, the Watcher language, very intriguingly, was and is a quality of sentience that actually goes back into beyond, because the ancient Egyptians, excuse me, said the ancient ones came from the land of the Watchers. And the Watchers are a quality, if you think of even the word watcher, non-intrusive, meaning that we create the conditions to remind you, you are woven of, like the library, in your DNA, all of these qualities and conditions. And if you think like an actor, well, I know I'm not a murderer, but how do I play it? It says, well, you're woven of these qualities. And if you create permission, in a sense, you realize you are suspending your disbelief, meaning you are not becoming that, you are actually allowing that to flow through you, then it will also expand your psychological horizons. You'll begin to appreciate the human story, not just from your perspective, but you'll begin to see the mathematics of how another person puts the world together. And that's where I believe much of the difficulty is we're taught reflectively, we're taught in terms of debate, we're taught in terms of critique, which, as I say, the metaphor here is that these are the tools that got us here. Almost like you'd say the martial art we were taught was karate, meaning I'll kick your ass. Now we're being slowed down and saying, no, no, jujitsu, aikido, I'll let you kick your own ass. Do you know, in other words, what we, and if you think of the quantum field, right? Think of the as imaginative or imaginal energy. And it says, whatever you invest in me, if you turn your anguish or even disdain for things into a greater theater, you're a storyteller that isn't saying my story is at the expense of you. I want to shame you, which is, in a mirrored society, always going to come back upon the projector of that, no matter how righteous one is. As I say, stand in front of a mirror, see yourself, see people behind you, think they're in front of you, allow those people to be your enemy. And if you were throwing a Molotov cocktail into the what you thought was ahead, but you hit a mirror, it wouldn't reach where you thought you were seeing. It would actually come back and immolate you. And this is one of the great cautions. This is why my judgment archetype is so very, very important, because in an odd way, I find now my work in archetype is a prophetic lens, meaning one isn't being personal about it. It's actually saying, no, we will reach in the human condition a place where there will be no belief that satisfies, because it won't be about belief. In a way, the Titanic will no longer be about the left side and the right side shouting at each other over the staterooms. It'll be, it's the iceberg, stupid, meaning that we've reached a point where the tools we used, what we thought the course of the journey was, is over. It's hit the life rafts. And if we think about from a home perspective, an intimate perspective, I want to, and this is what I found during the fire, because the infrastructure fell apart. There were no firemen, nobody showed up. It was an extraordinary indoctrination or initiation, because Carla and I stayed, and what we experienced though was from our daughter, one daughter in Morocco, who was of course in anguish, our other daughter who was 9 months pregnant in anguish, but the community, this unwillingness, and that was love with a capital L. And as a matter of fact, during the fire, I felt a prayer field, which I would always pass off as, oh, romantic, sort of theater. But I started to realize that there is, in these times of trauma, a falling away of the old stories. Like if you are on fire, let it go. It will burn down your house. And I was actually told by this remarkable moment, on the third night of the fire, in absolute fatigue, it just hissed at me, tell me what you hate and I'll burn down your house. It chilled me. It was like, wow. This was why it was an apocalyptic fire, meaning that the forces themselves will no longer tolerate a type of maltreatment. Think of the lover saying, I'm not gonna give you anything anymore. If you don't give and I think that that's part of this transformation, because my work is saying it's not that we die, or but that even my Phoenix Arise that blossom says, no. The mandala, the fractal that creates the blossom, which in this Phoenix Arise, wherever you put it together, creates a different mandala, a different blossom, a different number of cards. But what they reveal, and this I think is so important, is that we open, that our purpose isn't that the bud is the closed fist, right? I'm going to box it out with you. I'm going to defend. But then we reach the point where there's, like the plant, there's no further to go. I can't fight you anymore. And we start to, and maybe that's the pandemic, go, I can't go. I have to, and at first, because we're not used to it, we think it's weird. You're so different from me. Those people are so, it's like, but then like the library, if we unfold and say, well, wait a minute, no, it's not the fighting over these things, but like what we're talking about as artists, it's the finding of one another, not to create groups of shame and hate, but to say it's always been, because the creative and the arts are where we're generous. This is one of the things I love about jazz musicians. It's this sense of, man, I don't want to tell you how to play. And there's no such thing as mistakes. If you fall, and this is what I love about art. My dad would say as a painter, he said, there's no mistakes in painting. And it's so true. Because as you know, that's the invisible hand of, why did I just spill ink, unless it was personal, over 6 months of work? Why did my cat just walk across? And to me, that's the, since the great choreographer that says, I'm trying to engage you in the environment in which you dwell, not simply the reflection of where you think you live. And that's maturing, I think.
I think that's one of the hardest parts for aspiring artists, is what you're saying, that there are no mistakes, that it's all a living exploration, and that the work of art that we create is something that we are just a midwife to, and that we don't have control over, that it has a life of its own. A lot of people seem to become very limited because of their perfectionistic and critical qualities towards their own work, and thinking that there is a right way to do something, and that, being afraid of making a mistake or whatever. But I think that that's very liberating for you to say that, you know, even if you do spill ink over a painting you've been working on for 6 months, that even that is perfect for the
Oh,
process of that painting.
I really, in my universe's organism paintings, which are 4 foot by 6 foot and 4 foot by 7 foot, so they're big paintings. And I'd worked, and I had a friend I painted with, and we would sort of, you know, not boldly critique, but say, oh, you know, maybe try this or that, you know, just in our conversation we'd paint together. And he said something to me, and he was right. It just wasn't working. But I'd worked on it for a year, and I took Van Dyke Brown, and I put Van Dyke Brown over everything. And my friend almost fainted. He said, I'm never going to give you a critique again. And I really, I said, no. I said, I have to break away from my memory. And I was working with oil, so you can do this with oil. I became a type of archaeologist. I'd wipe away, and something that I was fixed on suddenly would have a completely different context. And like music, it would start to suggest, oh, we'll try this. And that's when I started to understand like this idea, again, even going back to Hans Hofmann, he'd talk about push, pull. And I thought that's interesting, you know, the sense of painting, covering up, drawing forth, not, you know, and seeing how it creates a conversation. No, part of the problem is what you're talking about is we are trained to be optical. And that at the expense often of the energetic. And that's why when I'm doing a painting class, I call it the chi of energy. You know, don't paint as yourself, read a poem or create a character, or read a scene in a play where you're a villain, and then paint as the villain. You know, get past what you think you are. In other words, get away from the mirror and have more fun. That's one of the things that I feel for artists, that a lot of acting tools are very helpful. Because it's like I will get people finger painting to begin with, you know, using their elbows, their arms, their bodies, because I want to, again, like you would if you were getting people into performance, I need you in your body. You can be creative as hell, you can be out there, but I want you here. You know, and so a lot of this is, and I feel especially with your generation and generations that are coming in now, as I said, I don't feel you're here. I don't think there's the time I had, in an odd way, to do many of the things I did. It's much more about being triggered. It's about a type of connection to a realization of a type of neurological lineage, almost like a system lighting up. You know, like storytellers realizing, oh, I don't have to, like the messianic complex. I don't have to take responsibility for the whole play. I don't have to take responsibility for the whole Titanic. You know, in other words, I realize now, oh, that argument is not relevant. It is, though, the conditions have changed. And I have to think about my family. I have to think about, what are we going to do now? And that's what the fire really brought as well, is that when you're in a condition where you are completely at, in a sense, the whims of destiny, you start to rely on other aspects of your own psyche. You really do start to talk and breathe calm, you know, when you're becoming nervous, of breathing calm. But I thought, well, that's what one does as a performer. You know, you talk to yourself. You don't, and that's what the archetype started to really train me, is that they said, if people, even I even just have people, I say, listen, take the cards and play like you're playing with dolls. Don't take it too seriously. See what the Empress wants to say to the Emperor. Do you know? Why are you not? It will help you get past, oh, this is this way. And so, because in a way, the accounts of the imagination, I'm convinced, created religion and spirituality to draw us away from the truth that the creative wants better theater. You know, one of my critiques is you can believe anything, but it's a good theater. You know, because at the end of the day, this is the frame of your life. So why would you be living it according to your neighbor's dislike of things? You know, it's like, and that's part of this, you know, and what started this hieroglyph of the human soul, and I've been working on it every day, was inwardly, I heard the last flood was water. This flood is information. And how interesting if ours is a question of coherence, like physics, right? If I can create, again, going back to the idea of the hub of the tarot, the spokes of the wheel, pushing out and holding the characters like all the books in the library, I can finally sit, as we do here, do you see, in the chair of Hermes with Thoth and the messenger, between the sun and the moon, we balance this sense that now, when I don't have to go further, but like a jazz musician, you're saxophone and I'm trumpet, then let's riff. And to me, this is the truth of the Grail. It wasn't that the knights got something. What they got was a greater ideal that bound them together to say, your dragon is different from mine. And it's not about attaining anything. It's about living towards something that says, you know what, you're much more interesting if you try. You know, and again, that's the lover waiting, right? She says, really, you think you're just so smug and interesting? I'm going to show up. You've figured out what's wrong with the world and why you hate? That's not an interesting conversation. And I rather feel that's where we're left alone in our stew until we realize it's our stew that's saying, you tell a story with this now. You know, every you'd say, what is the health of every generation? I like this. I even say telling the story that lets us say yes rather than yikes. You know, it's simple. It's that everything is a puzzle on a quantum level. The pieces are being given to us. And a lot of people wonder about Trump. And I say, listen, Trump, the archetypes are called trumps. The 16th key is the Trump Tower, or the Tower Trump. Trump, 16, Mars, is orange. So when we start to see that the outer symbolical theater, like 9/11, now what's interesting with my world archetype, it is dated 9/11/1986. And this is actually, this is the you can see this is the one with the twin
yeah,
pillars.
wow.
And so this is 15 years to the day of the falling away. And you can start to see this Gothic, almost like this going back to the 12th century, this conflict going back. Do you see this binary conflict that reveals her? Do you see once again, because this is where she, the quality of soul, essentially is in all worlds simultaneously, and that what below is a fight. And the binary finally leads to the opening of the inner eye, which I'm convinced, if you stand on the tarot as a wheel on the horizontal, then that eye, this eye, you see, becomes what we talked about a little bit earlier, the greater sense of wonder. And when I think about why I love artists so much, poets so much, why I love those willing to dream, I love those willing to dare, like mountain climbers, is because I really feel that it's the willingness to not know, to step in and say, listen, I love mountain climbing. I don't know why my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I learned so much, you know, in that essential terror, in a way. You know, it gives a focus. And I keep feeling, why do we in a way have this sense of, oh, this is the norm? And I think that that's why the work here in my home is saying, no, everyone in their interior is very unique. But if they realize in their interior they're not incomplete, essentially they're part of a question, which is, what does it mean to be human? And as a matter of fact, my strength archetype, when I write about it, she says that my question is about finally becoming human. And as simple as that sounds, it's the most difficult thing in the world, because we've wanted to be transhuman, greater than human, more than human. But what is that? It's that's to escape. But when you say, wait a minute, I don't want to leave. I want my granddaughter. I want to hold her hand. I want to kiss my wife. You know, I don't want to leave this for a different theater. You know, I don't want to go, and I feel like that's what's coming home to a lot of people, because things are being stripped away, and the questions becoming more fundamental. What do you love? What do you love? What would you be willing to say, I'm not leaving? And then that's what the fire for me was. You know, it was that realization of, I protect this. I am this. You know, that it's not a question any more than a captain would leave his ship. You know, and it became an interest. And even the fire, when it came, it said, are you inwardly, it said, are you leaving or staying? And it came, as I said, as a tornado. So it punched me into the house. It was, and I came back out, and I really felt like I was staring a dragon in the face, this black stillness with red embers, you know, coming, and then it went into full force. And again, like going back into time, and I started to see that these tremendous energies are asking us, almost like you'd say, like a big wave, right? You can't do anything about it, but you can lean into it. You know, you can use your energies where you're not drawn overboard by saying, this isn't going to work. Look at those awful people. See how evil they are. But you say, no, wait a minute. If this is the 16th key, if this is the Trump Tower, if Mars sets everything on fire, if the fire reaches my home, Olendar, 2 years to the day of the election, and it tells me that neighbor hates neighbor, and community is being lost because there's more attention to what is hated than what is loved, and that walls are being built to keep others out. And the Shumash, the ancestors say, you can't own this land. You must be the wise custodian. It's sacred. And if you think you own it, this is going to be difficult for you. And I really think that this is one of the things that we're in a way, all of this we've reached a point where we took everything in our way. I say I'm the white guy on Indian land. And you say, and that's when I was in Cambodia on the killing fields. I thought, what do you do with the root of evil? What do you do with all of the unthinkable awfulness of what's gone on, in a way of, I'll take your land, I'll destroy your culture, I'll enslave you. What do you do? And I feel that this is saying, look, if you look at this with blame, then there's always the villain, and you'll, in a sense, be drawn into the sea of chaos of anger. But if you begin to do what a librarian does, or what I learned, I was asked, I actually told in the killing field, because I was overwhelmed with a type of soul trauma, it said, yours is to witness, not to judge. These tears are not your tears. Do not cry. This is for those who lost their children, their mother, their father. This is their grief. Do not betray them with the smallness of your emotions. And I was like, wow. Well, what do I do with the heart of darkness? And it said, do not look into the heart of darkness. I will draw you in. And it said, and I said, well, what do you do with the damage to the soul of the people? It said, stop. Do not look toward the death, but look toward the life, the perennial root. And it was a Buddhist realization. Do you know that? Look at the children's smiles, look at the hearts, look at the people who still regrow. And I started to think, man, that's the human condition. Isn't it trying to say over and over again, you're from a heroic willingness to endure, to not figure out and battle the heart of darkness. In a way, that's a fool's bet. It will always win. It's like battling a vampire. It's just not a good idea. And you don't have to, because what a vampire dreads is light. Shed some light on the situation.
What do you think about this current situation with COVID and the pandemic, and how does that fit into this unfolding from an esoteric lens?
When we begin with the world archetype in 1986, and the binary pole that leads to, and that's the downstairs work for me. That's the 17 years work downstairs. That's the room of the son asking the father, what's the difference of things? And the father says, it's a deep question, because you'll realize that it's an instrument, and all of these characters, all of these keys are the human condition. It's not whether you like one or the other. They are part of the lens of the human story. They create essentially the human comedy. They create, through the father, the different characters. But we will ascend now to the realm of the ancestors and the mother, into the library. We will ascend not to leave, but to move into the truth that you are the outcome of a willingness that began in a cave with the question, what does it mean to be human? And that's why the mother here, Sophia here, philosophia, wisdom, is over and over again, and why we go from black and white below in this home to color above. I'm convinced not only has relationship to the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy leaves to the imagination, but she doesn't want to be stuck there. She says, I need to go home. I want to be with those I love. She goes back to the black and white, meaning she goes through the father's room, but she sees that it wasn't just the difference between things. There is a deeper or greater music. And that's why a lot of the relationships here, I feel, are building, again, in this arch, that when you say about the pandemic, think of a conversation that said, as the world goes toward, in a sense, blossoming its greed and its malfeasance, because this is the nature of the ego that says, if I take more and more and more, I can avoid the emptiness. I can outrun my responsibility. And I really think that the virus, when we look at this, forces people, and it's odd that it's had such a political divisiveness, but in a way that deepens the conversation, because it's saying don't take sides, but look at the wheel and characters involved in it. Because part of the conditioning going on, the tarot had to do with, in a way, the injection of deeper form, like we are an instrument. 9/11, 2001, when the Hieroglyph of the Human Soul, or the acronym being THOTH's library, and downstairs is the Book of Thoth, because this is what the tarot is known as. So it's interesting that we return to Thoth's library here, and it says, well, where is here? And it says, it's domestic space, it's private space. And in a way, you know, because I was looking at like cruise ships and people getting larger and larger and larger, as if everything was being bloated, exaggerated, overwhelmed by the need to escape, to distract, to go to, you know, Disneyland, and Jung got at it. He said that you know, he really felt that, and it was actually about Theosophy, it's about that he warned that people will learn the mantras of all worlds and texts and religions by heart, but all because they don't believe there's anything of real value inside of themselves. And I see that that's really sort of, you could say, well, that's sort of the world.
Wow.
So many individuals feel there's nothing of any inherent value in them. And that's why I do, when going back to the sense of, you know, well, what does the artist do? What does the storyteller do? I say, take that into consideration. How do you create a sense of dignity, that you are part of something, in the willingness to live the not knowing, not being able to figure it out. But at the end of the day, understanding that the question was much bigger than one of our lives. As if to say, each age, you know, we come almost like a theater group. You know, we want to ask different questions, and we realize, like a very complex system, it can't be one archetype. You know, but if we can each stand in the center, in the hub, then the character that you are isn't trying to be Laertes if it's Hamlet. You know, or you're not trying to tell Polonius what he ought to do with his performance. You realize, no, the play's the thing. We're asking a question about not one character, but characters in relationship to context. And this is why I feel that the arts and the creative, when looked at this in this way, do become our truer philosophical way of asking things, because in a way we do want to move it into something that is, you need to study this. And that's what I realized with the tarot. It taught me, because when you go as deeply as I did, it's like building a Ferrari and getting into the engine and the spark plugs and the running gear and the, you know, and everyone's like glazed over because they've never really thought about what's inside of a Ferrari, let alone, you know, they wait for you to give them the keys. They want to take it for a spin. And that's what I realized with my work. It was like, I loved talking about it, but for the most part, it was, and that's why I think my book is important, because it was to say, listen, some will be visual, some will want to know about the archetype. Then there are those that want to go into the symbolism, but don't give it all at once. Let it be a type of contemplative sense, because some people they're much more sensual. They don't really respond, and others go, I need to know where that comes from. You know?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about your process when you were creating the tarot cards. Did you pre-plan with a lot of sketching and thumbnailing and sort of contemplating the symbols before you created the work, or did you just kind of jump into the creative process and allow the cards to emerge more spontaneously?
You know, it's very interesting. I had started actually what got me on my path toward the tarot, which was nothing I thought I'd ever do. It wasn't like I was even that interested in it. But Edwin Steinbrecher, I was, though, as an actor, as a performer, as a creative being, I was looking for active meditation. I wanted to know how to access my instrument. I didn't want to like TM and go off and, you know, I wanted to be like gathering sort of more insight into how I was composed, more like an actor's quest to say, how does this machine work? And so Ed brought me in. He said, and his book is called The Inner Guide Meditation, and it's based on Jungian active imagination, one's natal astrology, and the tarot archetypes. And he had seen in my artwork this relationship to archetype, which was already very powerful. And he said, well, why don't you try drawings, one. And I looked at him and I remember it was so snotty. I thought, oh, well, I've always liked the ideas, but the drawings have been a bit wanting. Some snotty young person's response. Like, I think I even said, how hard could that be? And I think Hermes must have been listening going, we're going to kick this guy's butt, because for 17 years, it really was a trail of, oh my God, this is impossible. Because I always, like, as I said with my painting, I used the brush as a way of finding something, almost like a sculptor finding the stone. With the tarot, it was very interesting because I was, and this is to all of my artist friends out there that go, oh man, I'm a maverick. I don't want anything to do with the systems, because I really was. I was like, I don't want to be bogged. But I realized that breadth is not depth. You can have a really broad vision, but no real depth or penetration. You can't really ask the deeper fundamental questions, which is what I was really interested in, like with Theosophy. I said, wait a minute, I want to know why this is what it is. And so I didn't start with other people's work as much as I read everything I could. I looked at it, but then, and I put it this way, when I started with the death archetype. That's my first drawing.
Wow.
And then I move forward from there into temperance, the devil, and that was because Ed had a magazine called The White Sun, The Inner Sun, and he asked if I could write something about do the death archetype, and I was really stymied. I mean, I looked at it, and as you know, obvious symbolism is like, as you said, where you just want to gag yourself. You're thinking, oh my God, this is really obvious, and kind of like a faucet not turned on. It wasn't yet vibing. It was sort of like, yeah, they're musical notes, but there's no music here yet, So I'd sketch and sketch and sketch, and I did. I remember it was Blavatsky's The Stanzas of the Book of Gian, which is actually what the secret doctrine is around. These very esoteric, you say, really fundamental perceptions about creation. And it was interesting because I was hit, and I think that this went back to the old alchemical days. I was hit on a type of multi-sensorial level. The music of the thing broke free. And in a way, I was no longer trying to draw what I thought I knew, which, I wasn't trying to make it look like something, but much more like a performer, an actor finding, well, how does it taste? How does the character feel? Where is this coming from in my body? Am I thinking from my groin? Am I feeling it in my heart? Now, is my breathing deep? Is it shallow? Am I, and you start to locate, as I said, much more in the sensorial patterns, because I had, not intentionally, but again, not intending to be an artist. My dad was that. But I was stuck when I was at Juilliard studying acting, and I used just throwing paint at the canvas, not to be an artist, but to connect with the emotional truth of something. And so I found that my technique, really from the meditation of direct talking, essentially with the inner archetypes, and realizing that level, created a type of, and from my, in a way, natural, spontaneous flow, my following this way of allowing things to flow, I started to do sketches, and then another sketch, and then another sketch. And it's interesting because there was no one approach. Each one was different. Like my strength archetype, I have to say, I, for some reason, was drawn to creating a sacred geometrical matrix behind her. And I didn't know why, because I didn't know what she was. But then she appears within, in a sense, from that deeper mathematical basis, from her heart, all of the rays extend into all of the areas of the drawing, which is the point of strength. Do you know, in a sense, it's the deeper meaning in a nutshell. So I found that it was mentoring me. And this is why I feel like, it's that we can know too much. We can have too many assumptions. We can try to illustrate something. And I even with the archetypes, after about 15 years, I said, okay, wait a minute, and they exist now. So I said, well, why can't I, if these exist in some other realm, why can't I, in a way, just look forward and at least get some inkling of what these things want to be? And I found it very interesting because it was almost like live theater. The character comes alive every night because you perform it. The archetypes come alive because of our willing to inquire. There is no fixed, there is, in a sense, an infinity of probabilities, and this is the outcome in our probability of this question. But the archetypes were trying to say, we're actually sentient. We're not things you're making up. And that's really what I learned in my inner process, was because oftentimes the symbolism, and as you can see, because it draws from a lot of different traditions at times, I'd put something down and I'd go, well, that's kind of crazy. And then I'd do some research. It's not crazy to the Celtic, it's like, and I'd go, oh, this is how the symbols are talking, and now that they're not in a framework of, I need to follow the dictum of someone else, but sort of the Blakean willingness to say, let me be the vehicle of my own transcendence. Let me be, in a sense, worthy of both the failure of these things, but also the realization of them. And in the failure of them, let there be a deeper realization. As a matter of fact, my moon archetype, I quite literally redrew from the ground up, and it became a completely different quality, going from a design to almost like a mezzotint, a type of like a softness that you see in the book. And that became more because the moon, when I'm not a design, I'm not a drawing, I'm a feeling quality. So if you want to express what I am, which is the knowledge of energy, there's no design in it. There's that which emanates. And that's why I rather feel that all of these energies are trying to say, listen, in alchemy, it's called solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. And I'm convinced that the creative spirit, and the deeper beloved, the quality of the deep feminine, is trying to say, do not worry about, as you say, battling the darkness, but tend toward that all things are grown, and what we pay attention to grows. And it's not shouting at something to grow, or shouting at something saying this doesn't and isn't. And that was actually the nature of my work as an artist, I realized, is that as an actor, I learned I didn't want to live a life blaming the outer circumstances of why I felt I deserved better, or why I thought, I was treated unfairly. I thought, this is like having a boat on the ocean. No, it's not personal, kid. We weren't expecting that wave. It capsized you. What can we say? Like you get over it. I even said an acting career was like working for the mob. You end up, it's not personal, kid. We have to whack you. And when you have that with the creative spirit, you go, oh, I get it. I'm not seeking favors. In other words, I'm allowing myself to enter these realms and realize what I call an etiquette of energy. There's an etiquette involved, and it's saying, that's what the archetypes teach. They teach this, no, it's not a matter of learning more. It's about trusting that many questions have to do with manners. And if people think bombast will, in a way, attract a lover, it doesn't work that way. And I keep feeling like, yeah, it's sort of like, maybe it's in the becoming, at the end of the day, attractive to these things, because we're willing to say, at least here in my small, that's why I tell people, I say, it's very healing. It doesn't have to be big, but grow a little garden, someplace where you say, hello life, and life can go, hello. And I rather feel that that's the intimate key. It's never anything big. It's always something intimate. And I think the artists that we revere is that really we're saying, listen, I was never what you think. What I was doing was paying attention, and oftentimes because I didn't have a choice in the matter. That some are just in a way called to these things. And that's why I do. I think that maybe it is a type of etiquette now of saying, let's honor, like musicians, one another's riff and vision. Let's share mutual enthusiasm and theos. When we rise, we start to say, yeah, I like this story better. I don't need to convince anybody. And I think for thousands of years, we've been taught, listen, if you can't sell it, if you can't convince, if you can't find, it's not valuable. And I always feel like that's where this beautiful naked muse is saying, don't listen to them. Put your arm around me. Let's go home together. And during the pandemic, you know what? Trust this inner conversation, because when you don't have to shout at the world, don't. And if you can't get away from yourself, maybe you should introduce yourself to a version of you that's been waiting to say hello, but it's asking you, because again, like the Watchers, it's not going to intrude any more than a library says, read this book. All of those systems reassure us that there are books to read that were much more interesting than we think, and that it's the questions that we ask that either liberate us or enslave us. And I kind of feel like that's the question now, is what you're paying attention to enslaving you? Or is it freeing you? Is the fire burning away the impurity in your old agreement field? Are you losing your Messiah complex and saying, maybe I don't have to change the world and correct people, but I'm looking at it much more as a human being, saying, in this family, there are a lot of characters that don't need my judgment, you see? And that's where the play begins. We start to say, people come in asking different questions. And when we put it together like the tarot wheel, we see a form that isn't about cross this line. It's about hold these greater truths. Step into the center and be your truth, because no one can create your music. And as you said, as an artist, and I love it because I agree with you wholeheartedly, we are the midwives of these qualities. Like the dancer in her body says, I'm not the music. We watch her dance, you know. We say, no, you're the soul of music. There's something beautiful about all that. So.
Wow. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Leigh. Yeah, this has been such an inspiring conversation. I want to ask you just one more question before we conclude, which is, do you have any words of wisdom for any young or aspiring artists? And if you could give yourself a word of wisdom to your younger self when you were first beginning on your journey, what would you tell yourself?
You know, I really feel it's about, of course, it's about trusting oneself. And my dad would always say to me, he said something, and I love it. I even quote it in my book. He'd say, know yourself, be true to yourself, and never laugh at another person's dreams. And I feel that one should not laugh at their own dreams as well. And that we ridicule ourselves. In a sense, we take on the voice of our own fears that what we do has no relevance or meaning or nobody cares. But I really think that if you start to develop a sense of, I am the custodian of what I love. And I start to look at other artists that are custodians as well. As a matter of fact, I look at many of the people I love most from history, and I realized they were custodians. They didn't live in worlds that oftentimes honored them or thought what they did was of any relevance. But almost like a love affair that one must have, saying, I will, and this is what I tell my artist friends, I say, don't ask people what they think about your art. Ask people what your art makes them think. Say, I don't need a critique. I do this for myself. I need a conversation. I need to inspire, because this isn't about correcting anything. It's about taking this as an element of conversation and saying, well, what now? Almost like really an acting exercise. Let's allow this to say yes, and how can we do this together? And I truly believe, close the door. Don't work in a way you have to have your own secret garden. That's what my work revealed to me. That I became so, I just realized that the questions I needed to ask were either not interesting at all to people, had no relevance, were completely retrograde. They'd roll their eyes. And I started to understand, like with my Theosophy meetings and the people that came here, I said, the world itself isn't interested in these things. But if we are, maybe tenfold, we have to take that, again, as a custodian, the responsibility. And that's why I opened my house. And I think where you are, if you have friends, get together. What I always did is I had texts. So it wasn't just a salon where we get into opinions about painting and then we're done speaking our piece and everyone goes our way. But actually taking books and ideas that allowed us to anchor ourselves in a type of deeper philosophical lens. You know, everything from Jung to Theosophy to the man and his symbols and the Red Book of Jung, all of these different things we've read over the years. And I started to realize that one of the great keys is to nourish yourself with the things that make you say, yes. Not yikes, but yes, because think of that as an energy. And sometimes you have to close the door. You have to have part of your studio that isn't up for someone saying, I don't like that, almost like a seedling. You have to realize that certain ideas are tender and you have to protect them. That's why I say it's not about the inner child. It's about human innocence. We are the protectors of human innocence. And if we understand that, then the intimate metaphor is very powerful, the subjective metaphor, the realization that your work is an intimate prayer with the creative spirit. It does not want you to quit. And if you are too reflective, it says, turn away from the mirror. Stop thinking of what you think other people are thinking. The truth is they don't care. You have to. You know, and I rather feel it's like a mantra. We have to be and give ourselves permission. You know, that for me is the key now, is to look at each other and say, in the world where people don't care about these things, when we care about them, it doesn't need to be noisy. It needs to be true. And in a world where people are shouting, don't shout, whisper. The people who are meant to hear you will. Like you and I, how did we find each other? It wasn't from shouting. It was from curiosity. It was reaching out. And I think that in that is a type of deeper ritual behavior. Brother, sister, let us reach out. You know, let's put the music together because we can. The arts are where we're generous. So let's be generous with ourselves. And if the world's not being generous with us, again, like a protective parent of human innocence, say, I don't want to be beaten up anymore. So I'm not going to keep sharing this. And I'm going to really be discerning about those that say, you know what? I really admire, I love this, or it inspires me. But the people that go and look at their watch, oh, let's go at lunch, or they don't realize it. Don't blame them, but they're never going to be interested. You know, realize the ones that are. And I really think that from this base, we start to be the cultivators of the environment that allows these things to grow, because we have been conditioned to let them grow in the realm of critique. And that's why the world essentially can't be intimate with itself. It's so afraid of being judged because it's so in judgment of others. You know, but the artist steps in and says, we're the ones that always say, you know, thesis, antithesis, resolution, right? We take the binary of these two eyes. I see the black, I see the white, I see the day, I see the night. But it's not to side. It's to put that wheel below me and feel it support my passion, to finally hold a vertical realization of an eye that never sees, but speaks to me in the lens of wonder. And maybe that's why, if we artists and dreamers and those that care about these things can say, I see you, I witness you, because I have realized, although this is my voice and all this is Jake's voice, it is one voice with many voices, one mind with many voices. And that's what's exciting, pulling us back to a deeper coherence of, remember, you didn't show up here alone. The Renaissance was not El Greco and Michelangelo alone. They were with Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci, and they all lived at the same time. So why wouldn't it be the same with us? That's a bit of optimism.
Absolutely.
You know? But I tell you, go to Venice, you don't look at the politics. Yeah, you look at the art, because that's
right.
the condition, right? So this has been great, Jake. I really just enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
thank you so much. Yeah, this was so inspiring. Thank you for all your wisdom and for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the book. I've been trying to manifest that book, but it's very difficult to get out here. So I really
that's the thing.
appreciate it.
I sent the book to a friend in England. It cost me $75. And I thought, because I've needed to get a PDF of this made, and I thought, like if you have it in a discussion group, share it with those in discussion, because I feel it needs to be, it's a really wonderful book to talk about these ideas and get them. So I'm so glad you have that, and see where it takes you, you know, because I know we'll talk again. I'd love to know, because I feel that a lot of this, I almost feel like a bit of like the happy librarian, you know, like we're so much more interesting than we think. And it's not about elsewhere and the other. It's about finally looking at each other, go, well, why wouldn't we be the center of our own narrative, in a sense, like the realization. And that's what I love, just to end this all, but with Joseph Campbell and the story of myth, is that the one thing he did is he said the hero's journey is not someone else, it's you. And that makes me go, so enjoy the journey. And as strange as the world is, think of it like dragons. Yeah, there's lots of dragons and you have your dragon, but don't fight them all. Because the one that you're meant to fight will transform you into something that moves beyond battle altogether. You see, and can simply, again, like the tarot, the emperor in the tarot, have no sword, no weapon, simply be. So good.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank
and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks again.
Yeah, and enjoy your day. I know we're at different days, so
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Blessings to you.
blessings
Thank you
to you,
so
Jake,
much.
and bless you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to the Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.